Thank you, Presiding Officer. I want to ask the First Minister about the legal advice on the Salmond Inquiry, because despite this Parliament voting for it to be released 4 months ago, it was only partially revealed this week. The Ministerial Code makes clear in section 2.30 that ministers must act lawfully, informed of the legal considerations, and that the legal implications of any course of action are considered at the earliest opportunity. And this part, acting early on legal implications, is important. So let's go through the timeline. 9 weeks before conceding the judicial review, legal advice stated that the case was more likely to fail than succeed. The First Minister chose to go forward. A month before conceding, legal advice said the least worst option was to stop because otherwise, and I quote, expenses will be far higher. The First Minister chose the worst option. 19 days before conceding, the Lord Advocate, government and external lawyers all said the case was not even stateable, the minimum requirement. The First Minister dug her heels in. So will she tell us, to quote the words of her own legal counsel, why did the government try to defend the indefensible for so long?
First Minister.
Well, I think as anybody who paid any attention to lengthy proceedings yesterday, which clearly didn't include Ruth Davidson, will have seen that's just simply not true. On December the 11th, the law officers were very clear, and the information on this has been published, and I think the quote from the law officers summarised in the note that was published in advance of yesterday was that there was no question that the case should be dropped. On the contrary, there were credible arguments to be made across the petition, including on the issue of the appointment of the investigating officer. So that was the position of the law officers. Things started to go wrong, seriously wrong in the case in the days that followed, and then due process was followed that led to a decision on the part of the government to concede the case. So that is there for anybody with an open mind to look at. I think the Deputy First Minister has undertaken to provide some further information to the committee, which will happen, and the Parliament can look at that. I answered questions for 8 hours on this yesterday. I answered every question that was put to me, and so, Presiding Officer, I intend now to rest on that, to allow both the committee and the inquiry on the Ministerial Code to conclude their work. In the meantime, I'm going to get on with the job I suspect most people watching at home right now want me to get on with, which is leading this country through and out of a pandemic. And I'll leave Ruth Davidson and the Conservatives to play the political games that they seem to prioritise over everything else.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, the First Minister characterised this as political games, but I have never forgotten the women who were failed at the heart of this inquiry. And the thing that the First Minister cannot get away from is that it was her government that failed them, and that questions still require to be answered. And First Minister, it's not up for question if the government ignored legal advice and cost taxpayers' money. What's being argued is how long and how much was wasted. And this is what's truly incredible. The view of legal counsel was, and I quote, based on the facts as then known. And First Minister, this government didn't even give its own lawyers the facts. Advocates Roddy Dunlop and Christine O'Neill stated this: "We have each experienced extreme professional embarrassment. On instruction, they made plainly and demonstrably untrue statements before a judge. Documents were withheld from those QCs, which were highly relevant yet undisclosed. They called that unexplained and frankly inexplicable. They refused to, and I quote, rehearse the regrettable way in which the document disclosure has unfolded." So I'll ask the First Minister to rehearse it for us now. Will she confirm that the withheld documents were precisely the ones that made this case unstateable?
First Minister.
Firstly, I'm going to agree with something that Ruth Davidson said. I agree that she has not forgotten the women at the heart of this, because I don't think Ruth Davidson ever remembered the women at the heart of this. The legal advice is there for everyone to see, and people with an open mind, which doesn't include Ruth Davidson, can look at that. Now, Ruth Davidson says that she's not playing political games. I beg to differ. I think we saw the true colours of the Conservatives yesterday. First of all, on Tuesday night, they said this. I don't know if Ruth Davidson approved this comment or not, but the Conservatives said in terms that it did not matter what I said before a parliamentary committee yesterday because they had already made up their minds. It's not about due process, it's political desperation on the part of the Conservatives. But, Presiding Officer, I think we also had a glimpse of some of the values at play with the Conservatives yesterday, because during that committee session, one of the Tory members on it seemed to be suggesting that I should have intervened in the process to effectively sweep the allegations against Mr Salmond under the carpet. And then the other Conservative member asks me to apologise for the inappropriate behaviour of a man. So there we have the Tories, I think, demonstrating without any help from me that they are indeed playing political games. So while they do that, I say again, 8 hours of evidence to a committee. It's time to allow the committee and the independent inquiry into the ministerial code to do their job. And in the meantime, I'm going to go on with my job of leading this country through COVID and out of lockdown.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer.
Order, please.
But the First Minister can't get away from the fact that this chamber is an organ of this Parliament, and this chamber only saw the legal advice that this chamber voted for 4 months ago this week. And we have every right to question a First Minister who is the head of a government who failed these 2 women. And First Minister, I want everyone to understand how incompetent and secretive this government is. Legal counsel was provided with 1 email in a chain. It was a crucial element to their defence. But they were not given the next email, sent less than half an hour later, in the same chain. It was withheld, and when it was finally handed over, it was one of the final straws, and her lawyers had to threaten to resign to force the government's hand. Presiding Officer, that information was available the whole time. The government could have passed it to their lawyers in September, or October, or November, but they withheld it. They kept it secret. And it cost them months and all of us £500,000 of taxpayers' money. First Minister, why was the crucial evidence withheld for months from the government's own legal team?
First Minister.
The case ultimately collapsed because information came to light. I set that out in the committee yesterday, and people can judge by looking at the advice that was published themselves. And of course the committee will come to its conclusions, as will the independent inquiry on the ministerial code, and I await the findings of both. But again, if I can try to strike a note of consensus, because I do believe in the importance of this democratic institution. By the time I sit down after this session of First Minister's questions today, I will have been subjected, rightly and properly, to 10 hours of parliamentary scrutiny over the course of this week. That's me doing my job in discharging my responsibilities. But can I gently point out to Ruth Davidson that this democratic institution that she extols the virtues of is the same democratic institution that she is about to depart to take up a seat in the unelected House of Lords. I think people across this country are becoming heartily sick of the soon-to-be Baroness Davidson lecturing anybody else on democracy.
Ruth Davidson.
Presiding Officer, because of the legal advice that had to be dragged from this government under threat of a vote of no confidence, we know that for weeks this government were definitively and beyond any doubt ignoring legal advice. But the case only became unstateable so late because this government withheld crucial documents for so long. They withheld documents from their own lawyers, they withheld them from the court, and they continue to withhold them from this Parliament. And what we've already seen shows that there's no argument if this government ignored legal advice. They did. The argument is if it did so for 3 weeks or for more than 3 months. There's no argument if the First Minister was at fault for losing more than £500,000 of taxpayers' money. The argument is only about how much she's to blame for. And there's no argument if Nicola Sturgeon broke the ministerial code. The argument is only about how badly she broke it. We believe that the sanction is to go Why doesn't she?
First Minister.
Well, I think Ruth Davidson has just shown her true colours and the Conservative true colours all over again. Because, of course, she stands up here and says scrutiny and democracy and due process is really important. But just as on Tuesday night, the Conservatives prejudged my evidence to the parliamentary inquiry, she's just prejudged the outcome of the independent inquiry into the ministerial code. This is just about desperate political games for the Conservatives. I suspect their private polling is even more desperate than the public polling right now, because remember, the people of Scotland have been voting no confidence in the Conservatives since the 1950s, and I think we're about to see why. So I'll go on with my job. I'll let the inquiries do their job. I've not prejudged them. Ruth Davidson clearly has. But I will also, in a few weeks, subject myself to the ultimate scrutiny, the scrutiny and the verdict of the people of Scotland, the verdict that matters most. And as I do so, Ruth Davidson will be slinking off to the House of Lords.